Here in Central Texas, we can grow some of the biggest, sweetest onions you've ever seen. But if you're an urban gardener, that can be a little bit tricky. Welcome to New Garden Road, where I share my love of gardening with you in a way that I hope will inform, inspire, and elevate you. Like this video if you like it, and subscribe to get notified for more gardening action. Planting the right variety of onion at the right time is absolutely essential. In Central Texas, we tend to grow short day varieties. They require 10 to 11 hours of daylight to trigger bulbing. There's also intermediate and long day varieties. Intermediate varieties of onions require 12 to 13 hours of daylight, while the long day varieties require 14 to 16. First of all, I like to set up my transplants. I'll remove any brown or rotten leaves and set aside any onions larger than 1/4 inch. Planting those pencil-sized transplants 4 to 6 weeks before your average last frost date is what's going to be ideal. Plants that are larger than 1/4 inch in diameter, when exposed to temperatures below 45 degrees for a prolonged period of time, will be triggered to go dormant. Once it warms up again, they're probably going to bolt, and that's really going to limit their size and their quality. They're not going to store well. It's not what you want. I like to soak my onion transplants in a solution of liquid seaweed for about 10 minutes just before I'm ready to plant them. This will encourage some of the root development and the establishment that I'm looking for. It also makes the roots a little bit easier to pull apart. When you get those onion transplants, a lot of times the roots are kind of matted together, and you may risk kind of tearing them, causing some trauma to those little transplants. But if you soak them in some seaweed, you're counteracting some of the stress, encouraging the root development, and also they're easier to pull apart. It's like magic. When it comes to onion terminology, there are rings, and that's the fleshy part at the base of the leaves. That's the part you eat. Those rings have a key role in determining the overall size of the bulb. If an onion plant is small when it's triggered to bulb, you're going to end up getting a small onion. Larger plants have more leaves, they're going to be better developed in their rings, and they're going to produce larger bulbs. That's what you want. Raised beds are great for growing onions. They typically have better drainage and they warm up more quickly due to the extra surface area. I really like to amend the soil with compost and an organic all-purpose fertilizer prior to planting. Fertility and moisture are also really vital as the bulbing is triggered. Once you notice those bulbs are sizing up, that's when you want to make sure you're feeding them regularly, making sure they're getting consistent moisture once a week, about 1 inch. Removing irrigation lines can make the job easier. Just remember, you want to put those back before you're transplanting your onions. It's going to be a little bit more tricky if you do it after you get them in there. Remove the onion transplants from their seaweed bath and allow the excess solution to drain for a few minutes. Soft rock phosphate is another great amendment for stimulating root development. I really like to put some in a bowl and dip the onion transplants in while they're still moist from the seaweed solution. Now it's time to plant these baby onions. I utilize a wire spacing grid in order to more easily plant my onions 4 inches apart, or 9 per square foot. First I use the grid and my hori-hori knife to make a small planting hole. I'm really keen on systematic approaches like this, as I feel they are more efficient for larger scale plantings. Once I've got the planting holes prepared, dropping in the onions is super easy. Remember to water them in really well about once a week if there isn't significant rainfall. Side dress in about 4 weeks with an organic fertilizer that's higher in nitrogen. Remember, you want those big leaves, big rings. That's going to produce a big bulb. Mulching the bed at this point is highly beneficial, as controlling weeds is key to growing bigger bulbs. Those onions don't have a big root system. If you have any weeds in there at all, they're going to be taking some of those nutrients. Onions are one of those crops that you can plant a lot in a small amount of space. This is a 4x8 raised bed. I've got pretty close to 32 square feet, just a little shy. I've got 264 onions growing. All right, so I'm gonna drop in a little footage here of my 2019 onion harvest. Now, you'll notice the tops are not green on these onions. That's because sometimes I don't time things out perfectly in the garden. That's how it goes. You don't have to wait until they're all the way brown. They should be green. They'll have fallen over. When growth slows and the necks of those onions get soft, Allow the soil to dry. Excessive moisture during this period will inhibit prolonged storage. When the onions are fully mature, the soft necks fall over while the leaves are still green. Pull up all the bulbs and place them in a dry, protected area for a few days before removing the tops and the roots. So I just got back into town from North Carolina, coming back to my home garden. These onions were getting soft necks right before I left. At the time we were getting a lot of rain, so I did put a structure over the raised bed. It's one of those hoop house structures. I made a video on how that goes. You can use it to winterize your raised beds. You can also use it to shield it from excess rain. You're trying to get things to dry out, you may need to build a cover to give those crops a chance to dry out, otherwise they might rot. If you have some large crates or boxes or something like that, that can be really helpful in processing these onions. After I've cured and trimmed up my onions, I bring them inside into a dark, cool, dry area. I can store these onions in my pantry for about 2 to 4 months. I love growing onions every year. I always grow the bulbing onions. I do grow some green onions. I typically do those from seed. Those are pretty easy and straightforward. If you want to grow these bulbing onions though, like I said, make sure you get some transplants. Try the seaweed solution, the soft rock phosphate. Make sure you get that timing down. Make sure you get a short day variety if you're growing them in Texas. Very important. I think they're pretty easy to grow. I always get a lot. One of my favorite ways to prepare and cook these onions would be to quarter them, put them on a skewer, give them some olive oil, and grill them. You have a crock pot or a pressure cooker or something like that, you can slow cook these guys, make some caramelized onions. All right, grow you some onions, y'all. Good times in the garden. And yeah, not real good. Let's talk about it. For more of the best gardening videos all around. Remind me a little much? Okay, that's great. Chop it up. Chop it up. Check out some of these other awesome gardening videos on my channel, like this one for basic transplanting. You can learn to grow your own food. Keep it organic.